The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, when the sun was just rising over New York City and the delegates of the United Nations were settling into their seats with coffee cups in hand and tired eyes from late-night negotiations about trade agreements that suddenly seemed very small. Ambassador Kethvaran of the Zithrani Collective materialized in the center of the assembly hall through a quantum projection that hummed with energy and cast pale blue light across the startled faces of diplomats from 193 nations. He stood 8 feet tall with skin like polished obsidian and 4 arms that moved with deliberate grace as he unfurled a scroll made of some material that glowed faintly in the artificial light of the chamber. People of Earth, he announced in a voice that resonated through translation devices in every language simultaneously. The Zithrani Collective, sovereign rulers of 17 star systems and guardians of galactic order for 12,000 years, hereby declare a state of war against your species. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft hum of recording devices and the distant sound of protesters outside who had no idea their signs about climate policy had just become irrelevant. Ambassador Kethvaran continued reading from his scroll, listing humanity's crimes with the careful precision of a bureaucrat who had done this many times before. First, unauthorized expansion into the Oort cloud, where human mining vessels had established operations without seeking collective permission. Second, refusal to submit to collective governance despite 3 formal demands delivered over the past decade, each one ignored with what the collective considered insulting casualness. Third, and this seemed to offend Kethvaran personally, the crime of treating collective communications as spam and filtering them into folders marked "read later" by automated systems. Your species has been judged deficient in respect, Kethvaran declared, his forearms spreading wide in a gesture that was clearly meant to intimidate. And the punishment for such deficiency is absolute subjugation or complete annihilation, the choice being ours to make. He paused, clearly expecting panic. He expected screaming and crying and desperate pleas for mercy. He had seen this reaction dozens of times across dozens of worlds. Species falling over themselves to surrender before the first shot was fired. Because the Zithrani Collective did not lose wars, and everyone in the galaxy knew it. Instead, the Secretary General of the United Nations, a small woman from Finland named Elsa Virtanen with gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, raised her hand politely and waited to be acknowledged. Kethvaran stared at her in confusion. "Yes," he said slowly. "You may speak, human." "Thank you," Secretary General Virtanen said with a warm smile. "We appreciate you traveling all this way to deliver this message in person. And we understand the collective must have a very busy schedule, so we won't take up more of your time." She stood and gathered her papers, as though preparing to leave for lunch. "We'll discuss your declaration and get back to you when we've reached a decision," she continued. "In the meantime, please enjoy the gift shop in the lobby. And I'm told the cafe on the 2nd floor makes an excellent sandwich." Kethvaran's obsidian face twisted into what might have been disbelief. "You do not seem to understand," he said, his voice rising. "This is a declaration of war, not a request for a meeting." "Oh, we understand perfectly," Secretary General Virtanen replied, still smiling, "and we thank you for your clarity on the matter. But we have a lunch scheduled with the delegation from Brazil to discuss rainforest preservation, and I'm afraid we simply cannot cancel on such short notice." She nodded to her aides, who began packing up documents and shutting down laptops with the casual efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times. "This is unprecedented," Kethvaran sputtered. "No species has ever responded to a collective declaration with such politeness." Secretary General Virtanen offered helpfully disrespect, Kethvaran corrected, his forehands clenching into fists. We prefer to think of it as efficient time management, the Secretary General said. Now, if you'll excuse us, the Brazilian delegation is waiting, and I believe they've brought that wonderful coffee we all enjoy so much. With that, she walked out of the chamber, followed by delegates from every nation, each one nodding politely to the stunned Zithrani ambassador as they passed within the hour. Every major news network on Earth had broadcast the declaration and humanity's response within 12 hours. Something remarkable began to happen. Every communication satellite orbiting Earth went silent at the same moment, their signals cutting off with synchronized precision that spoke of careful planning. Rather than system failure, deep space relays that had been broadcasting human entertainment and scientific data to the stars for decades fell quiet quantum beacons that enabled faster than light communication with distant probes powered down one by one. Earth's electromagnetic signature, normally a blazing beacon of radio waves and digital chatter that could be detected from light years away, dropped to almost nothing, to Zithrani sensors monitoring from their nearest outpost. It appeared as though the entire planet had simply switched off like a light bulb. Cathvaran reported this development to the collective high command, with what his subordinates later described as poorly concealed hysteria. They turned off, he repeated to the Supreme Executor. The entire planet just turned off. The Supreme Executor, an ancient Zithrani named Yulthus, who had orchestrated the conquest of 6 species in his long career, dismissed this concern with a wave of one weathered hand. They are afraid, he declared with absolute confidence. They are hiding in the dark like prey animals, hoping the predator will pass them by. He ordered the 7th Fleet to depart immediately for Earth. 400 warships, carrying 2 million soldiers, launched from 17 different worlds, converging on a small blue planet that had dared to smile and excuse itself for lunch. The fleet traveled for 3 weeks through folded space, its commanders reviewing battle plans and its soldiers sharpening weapons and its admirals discussing how they would divide the conquered Earth among themselves. None of them knew that while they traveled, something was happening on Earth that would change everything. None of them suspected that humanity's silence was not the quiet of fear. It was the quiet of a door being closed and locked and reinforced with something the galaxy had never seen before. The 7th Fleet emerged from folded space, expecting to find a terrified world ready to surrender what they found. Instead, made even the bravest among them hesitate. But that is a story for another chapter, when the closed door would reveal its true nature, and the Zithrani collective would learn that some species do not run, and do not fight, and do not surrender. Some species simply decline to participate. Fleet Commander Valeth stood on the bridge of the collective warship, Inevitable Victory, and stared at the view screen with all 4 of his arms hanging limp at his sides. In his 40 years of military service, he had seen many strange things across the galaxy. He had witnessed the crystal forests of Methano 7 burn under orbital bombardment. He had watched the gas giants of the peripheral systems ignite into artificial suns to power collective war machines. He had stood victorious over the ruins of civilizations that had dared to resist. But he had never seen anything like this. Earth was gone, not destroyed, not hidden behind clouds or atmospheric interference. Just gone. In its place hung a perfect sphere of absolute darkness, a black shell that extended from where low orbit should have been all the way out to encompass the moon itself. The sphere reflected nothing, not starlight, not sensor beams, not the searchlights that nervous gunners swept across its surface, hoping to find some imperfection. It was as though someone had cut a hole in the universe and left only emptiness behind. What am I looking at? Valeth demanded of his science officer, a young Zithrani named Kes, who was frantically adjusting her instruments. I do not know, Commander, Cass admitted with obvious terror in her voice. Our sensors cannot penetrate it. Our probes disappear into it without returning any data. It appears to be composed of nothing we have ever encountered. Valeth turned to his weapons officer. Fire a warning shot. Low yield. Let us see how this shell responds. The weapons officer obeyed, and a beam of concentrated plasma energy lanced across space toward the black sphere. It struck the surface and simply vanished. No explosion. No ripple. No reaction of any kind. The sphere absorbed the attack as casually as an ocean absorbs a raindrop. Increase yield. Valeth ordered, his voice tight with frustration. Another shot. This one powerful enough to crack a continent. Nothing. All batteries. Full barrage. 400 warships opened fire simultaneously, unleashing enough destructive energy to sterilize a solar system. Plasma beams in kinetic rounds and antimatter torpedoes struck the sphere in a continuous stream of violence that lasted for 17 minutes. When the barrage ended, the sphere remained exactly as it was, unchanged, unmarked, utterly indifferent to the most devastating assault the collective had ever launched against a single target. Valeth felt something cold settle in his chest. An unfamiliar sensation that he eventually identified as uncertainty. Deploy ground forces to the moon, he commanded. Perhaps we can establish a beachhead beyond the shell and find some weakness. The troop carriers descended toward the lunar surface, their pilots reporting that the moon appeared normal on long-range scans. Its gray dust and ancient craters visible through powerful telescopes, but as the carriers approached, the pilots discovered that the moon was not normal at all. The same black material covered every inch of the surface, transforming the familiar landscape into a featureless dark plain that offered no landing zones and no entry points. Worse, someone had left a message carved into the darkness across what had once been the Sea of Tranquility, in letters large enough to be read from orbit. Were words in 17 different languages. We appreciate your visit. Please leave your concerns at the door. We will get back to you. The message was perfectly cheerful, perfectly polite, and somehow more unsettling than any threat or defiance would have been. Valeth read the human words and felt that cold uncertainty spread through his entire body. What manner of species responds to invasion with courtesy, he muttered to himself. His second in command, an experienced warrior named Thraxis, who had served in 20 campaigns, moved to stand beside him. Perhaps they hoped to confuse us, Thraxis suggested, to make us hesitate with strange behavior, while they prepare some attack from within their shell. Valeth nodded slowly. That must be it. This is a delay tactic, nothing more. No species can maintain such a barrier indefinitely. We will wait them out. He ordered the fleet to take up siege positions around the sphere, spreading the 400 ships in a formation that allowed them to monitor every angle, while staying far enough apart to avoid being destroyed by a single weapon. We will be patient, Valeth announced to his crews. They cannot hide forever, and when their shell fails, we will be here to remind them why the collective is feared throughout the galaxy. Days passed, then weeks. The sphere remained unchanged. Valeth ordered his scientists to study the barrier continuously, hoping to find some weakness, some fluctuation, some hint of the technology that made such a thing possible. They found nothing. The sphere behaved as though it were not technology at all, but simply a fundamental property of space, as natural and permanent as gravity itself. Soldiers who had trained their entire lives for glorious combat found themselves with nothing to do but watch an unchanging black surface and wonder what was happening on the other side. Morale began to suffer. Fights broke out between bored warriors who had no enemy to fight. Supply ships arrived from collective space carrying food and increasingly concerned messages from the high command asking Why the conquest of a single primitive world was taking so long, Velitha had no good answer. He could only report that the humans had closed their door and showed no signs of opening. Months turned into years. The Seventh Fleet, designed for swift and brutal conquest, became an occupation force with nothing to occupy. Velith grew older watching the sphere, his obsidian skin developing the cracks and fissures of advanced age. He began to have dreams about the message on the moon. Those polite words that seemed to mock him more cruelly than any insult. "We appreciate your visit." As if the mightiest fleet in the galaxy were nothing more than tourists who had arrived at an inconvenient time. "Please leave your concerns at the door." As if a declaration of war were a minor complaint to be addressed at their leisure. "We will get back to you." As if the Zetherani collective were petitioners waiting for an appointment that might never come. Velith stood on his bridge night after night, staring at the sphere, waiting for something to change, and sometimes, just sometimes, he could swear he saw the shell flicker, brief glimpses of light behind the darkness city lights. Perhaps ships moving in orbit. Life continuing, as though nothing unusual were happening. The humans were not suffering inside their shell. They were not rationing supplies or panicking about the army at their gates. They were living their lives, completely indifferent to the siege that was supposed to bring them to their knees. Velith realized with growing horror that he was not besieging humanity. Humanity was ignoring him, and there was nothing in all his training, nothing in all the collective's vast experience, that told him what to do about a species that simply refused to acknowledge that a war was happening. The door remained closed, and behind it, Earth waited with infinite patience for its unwanted visitors to understand that some doors cannot be broken down. They can only be opened from the inside when the opener is ready, and not one moment before. 7 years had passed since the Seventh Fleet arrived at Earth, and Commander Velith could no longer remember what victory was supposed to feel like. His flagship, the inevitable victory, had become a prison of routine and tedium. Every morning he woke in his quarters and reviewed the same reports that said nothing had changed. Every afternoon he stood on the bridge and watched the same black sphere that offered no weakness and no response. Every night he dreamed of that polite message carved into the moon and woke with his 4 fists clenched in frustration. The war that was supposed to last weeks had become an endless stalemate, and his crews were falling apart. 3 ships had been lost to accidents caused by exhausted maintenance teams. 17 soldiers had taken their own lives rather than face another day of watching nothing happen. Morale had collapsed so completely that Velith had stopped reading the psychological reports because they only confirmed what he already knew. His army was dying of boredom. The collective high command sent increasingly angry messages demanding results, and Velith had run out of excuses. He could not explain why the most powerful fleet ever assembled was helpless against a species that refused to fight. He could not justify the resources being consumed by a siege that showed no signs of ending. He could only wait and hope that something would change. Then something did change, but not in the way Velith expected. A young intelligence officer named Drell burst onto the bridge one evening with a data tablet clutched in her trembling hands. "Commander, we have intercepted transmissions," she announced breathlessly. "Human transmissions, but not from Earth." Velith turned to face her with the sudden alertness of a predator sensing prey. "Where?" he demanded. Drell's hand shook as she projected a star map into the air above the bridge. "Everywhere. Commander, we have detected human communications from 47 different star systems, all outside collective space." The map showed dots of light scattered across regions the collective had never bothered to explore. Empty space that was supposed to be worthless. Each dot represented a human transmission. Each transmission revealed the same impossible truth: humanity had not been trapped on Earth waiting to be conquered. Humanity had been leaving for decades. Colony ships had departed in secret, carrying millions of people to distant worlds where they had built new homes far from collective reach. Exploration vessels had mapped routes through unexplored space, finding habitable planets and resource-rich asteroids that humanity was already exploiting. Automated seeders had spread human presence across a volume of space larger than the collective itself. Valeth stared at the map with dawning horror. They never cared, he whispered. Earth was never their only home. He understood now why the humans had responded to the war declaration with such casual indifference. They had known, even then, that the collective could not hurt them in any meaningful way, even if the Seventh Fleet had somehow broken through the shell and conquered Earth. Humanity would have continued thriving across dozens of worlds the collective did not know existed. The war had been meaningless from the moment it began. Earth was not a desperate stronghold. It was a sideshow, a minor inconvenience that humanity was content to wait out while life continued elsewhere. Valeth felt something break inside him, some fundamental assumption about how the universe worked. The collective had always believed that might made right, that any species could be conquered if enough force was applied, but force only worked against enemies who could be found and who could be threatened with something. They valued humanity had simply removed itself from the equation. They had closed the door and walked away, leaving the collective to exhaust itself against an obstacle that did not matter. The intelligence officer continued her report, her voice growing more alarmed with each word. Commander, the transmissions indicate that several human colonies have already surpassed their original population. They are growing faster than any species in collective records. Valeth nodded slowly. And we cannot stop them because we do not know where they are. It is worse than that, Drell said quietly. Some of these colonies have been communicating with collective subject species, offering trade agreements and cultural exchanges. What? Valeth grabbed the data tablet and scrolled through the intercepted messages with growing disbelief. Humans were talking to the Kethrani of Sector 9, offering them advanced medical technology in exchange for rare minerals. Humans were negotiating with the Vorsk of the Outer Rim, promising them agricultural techniques that could end the famines the collective had allowed to continue for generations. Humans were reaching out to every species that had ever been crushed under collective rule, not with weapons or threats, but with gifts and kindness and opportunities for mutual benefit. They are building alliances, Valeth realized. They are making friends with our subjects while we sit here watching a door that will not open. Back at Earth, as if to mock his growing despair, the shell flickered again. For just a moment, the darkness became transparent, revealing the planet within. Valeth saw city lights covering every continent. He saw thousands of ships moving in complex orbital patterns. He saw construction platforms building something massive near the location where the moon had been before the shell enclosed. Yet he saw evidence of a civilization that was not just surviving, but thriving beyond anything the collective had achieved in 12,000 years of conquest. Then the shell became opaque again, hiding everything behind perfect darkness. The glimpse lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but it was enough. The humans wanted him to see. They wanted him to know that his siege meant nothing, that his fleet was irrelevant, that all the power of the collective could not even inconvenience them. Valeth sat down heavily in his command chair and stared at the view screen with empty eyes. We have lost, he said quietly. Not because they defeated us, but because they refused to play our game. Drell stood beside him in uncomfortable silence. What do we do now? Commander. Valeth had no answer. For the first time in his long career, he faced an enemy he could not fight, could not threaten, could not even find humanity, had turned the collective's greatest strength into its greatest weakness. All that power, all those ships, all those soldiers trained for glorious conquest. None of it mattered against a species that simply closed its door and walked away and continued. But now Valeth understood that he was not waiting for victory, he was waiting for humanity to decide. When they were ready to talk, and until that day came, the Seventh Fleet would remain here, watching a door that would not open, slowly falling apart while the universe changed around them. The humans had won without firing a single shot. They had won by refusing to participate, and that, Valeth realized, was the most terrifying form of power he had ever encountered. The Zethrani Collective had ruled the galaxy through fear for 12,000 years. And fear requires constant maintenance. Subject species must believe that rebellion means death. They must believe that the collective is all-powerful and all-seeing. They must believe that resistance is not just futile, but unthinkable. The siege of Earth destroyed all of these. Beliefs in a single-decade word spread slowly at first, carried by traders and smugglers and diplomatic couriers, who whispered about the humans who had closed their door and refused to surrender. Then the word spread faster, carried by the human colonists themselves as they reached out to collective subjects with offers of friendship and trade. Finally, the word became a roar that echoed across 17 star systems. The collective had declared war on humanity. Humanity had laughed and gone back to work, and the mighty Seventh Fleet was still sitting outside Earth after 10 years, watching a door that would not open, accomplishing nothing. The first rebellion began on Kethros Prime, a mining world where the native population had been enslaved for 300 years. The Kethrani workers put down their tools one morning and refused to enter the mines, demanding freedom and fair treatment and all the rights that humans had offered them in those secret communications. The collective sent soldiers to crush the rebellion. But the soldiers were spread thin across an empire that was suddenly questioning everything while they were busy on Kethros Prime. Rebellion erupted on Vorsk 7, then on the orbital stations of the peripheral systems, then on the agricultural worlds that fed the collective's army's supreme executor Ylthus, who had ordered the war against humanity with such confidence all those years ago, found himself fighting fires across his entire domain. He recalled ships from the Seventh Fleet to help suppress the uprisings, then recalled more ships when the first ones proved insufficient. Commander Valeth watched his fleet shrink from 400 ships to 300. Then 200, then 100. Each departing ship carried soldiers who were secretly relieved to escape the endless tedium of watching the black sphere. Each departing ship left the remaining crews feeling more isolated and forgotten. Valeth had become an old man during the siege, his once strong body now bent and weathered, his forearms moving with the painful slowness of advanced age. He had spent 15 years of his life staring at a door that would not open, and he no longer remembered what he was fighting for. His communications to the high command became less about military strategy and more like, please, please, tell me what to do. He wrote in one message that would later be found in collective archives. I have followed every order. I have tried every tactic. I have given everything to this mission, but the humans simply do not respond. They do not attack. They do not surrender. They do not acknowledge that we exist. I am not fighting a war. I am being ignored to death. Please tell me how to make them see me. The High Command had no answer. They were too busy dealing with an empire that was falling apart. The human colonies had grown bold as collective power weakened, establishing open relations with former subject species and offering them membership in something called the Earth Friendship Network. The name was almost insultingly gentle. But the reality behind it was a new power structure that did not need conquest or fear to function. Human technology flowed to worlds that had never known anything but collective exploitation. Human ideas about freedom and dignity spread like wildfire among populations that had been told for generations that they were inferior. Human ships traveled freely through regions the collective could no longer patrol effectively. Everything the collective had built over 12,000 years was dissolving. And at the center of the collapse was a single black sphere that had proven utterly impervious to force. Valith was alone on his bridge one evening, the skeleton crew that remained having mostly retired to their quarters, when the sphere flickered again. This time, it did not stop flickering. The darkness became transparent and stayed that way, revealing Earth in all its impossible beauty. Valith saw oceans and continents and clouds, just as the old records had described. But he also saw things that defied explanation. Massive structures floated in the upper atmosphere, cities that hung in the sky. The moon had been transformed into something covered in lights and movement, an inhabited world that buzzed with activity. Millions of ships swarmed around the planet like insects around a hive. More ships than Valith had ever seen in one place, and one of those ships was moving toward him. Valith's hand shook as he activated the communication system. Unknown vessel. This is Fleet Commander Valith of the Zithrani Collective. State your intentions. The response came in a warm female voice, speaking perfect Zithrani. Hello, Commander Valith. My name is Dr. Yuki Tanaka, and I am Earth's neighborhood liaison. We noticed you've been waiting for a while, and thought it might be time to have a chat. Would you care to come aboard our station for tea? Valith stared at the communication panel in disbelief. 15 years of siege. 15 years of frustration and despair, and watching everything he believed in crumble. And now a human was inviting him for tea. I accept, he said, because he could not think of anything else to say. The human ship guided his shuttle to a station that had apparently been hidden inside the shell. The entire time, the station was beautiful. All curved surfaces and warm lighting and plants growing in every corner. Dr. Tanaka met him at the airlock with a smile that seemed genuine, and a handshake that required only one of her two arms. She was small by Zithrani standards, with dark hair and bright eyes and an energy that made Valith feel exhausted by comparison. Thank you for coming, she said cheerfully. I know you've been waiting a long time, and I apologize for the delay. But we had to make sure certain conditions were met before we could have this conversation. What conditions? Valith asked wearily. Well, primarily that your empire had stopped being a threat to anyone but itself. Dr. Tanaka replied without any trace of cruelty in her voice, which seems to have happened about 3 years ago. But we wanted to give you some extra time to adjust. She led him to a comfortable room with windows that looked out at the earth. Below, tea was served, along with small cakes that Valith found surprisingly pleasant. You must have questions, Dr. Tanaka said. Valith had 1,000 questions, but only one that mattered. Why did you close the door instead of fighting us? Dr. Tanaka's smile softened. Because fighting you would have meant becoming like you, she said. And we had no interest in ruling anyone or conquering anything. We just wanted to be left alone to live our lives and explore the universe in peace. But you could have destroyed us. You must have known that your technology was superior. Of course we knew, Dr. Tanaka agreed. And that's exactly why we chose not to use it for violence. Power creates responsibility, Commander. And we felt responsible for finding a better way. She poured more tea into his cup with the casual grace of someone who had done this many times. So we closed the door and waited. We waited for your empire to realize that force doesn't work against people who refuse to be forced. We waited for your subjects to see that a better life was possible. We waited for you specifically, Commander Valith, to be ready to hear what we had to say. And what do you have to say? Dr. Tanaka set down her teacup and looked at him with eyes that held no anger, no triumph, no contempt. We say that the war is over, not because anyone won or lost, but because wars only exist when both sides agree to fight, and we never agreed. We would like to establish normal relations with what remains of the collective. We would like to trade and share knowledge and help rebuild the worlds that have been damaged by all this unnecessary conflict. She smiled again. We would like to be friends. If you'll have us. Valeth sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything he had heard. His entire life had been built around the principle that strength meant dominance, that power meant control, that victory meant making others submit. But the humans had shown him a different kind of strength, the strength to refuse, the strength to wait, the strength to offer kindness to an enemy who had threatened them with annihilation. I will convey your message to the High Command, he finally said. We know you will, Dr. Tanaka replied. And we'll be here whenever they're ready to talk. The door is open now. It will stay open for as long as we exist. She stood and extended her hand again. Thank you for the conversation, Commander. I hope we can have many more. Valeth took her small human hand in his large Zithrani grip and felt something he had not felt in decades. Hope. The door was finally open, and through it lay a future that neither the collective nor humanity could have imagined alone. Ambassador Alara Vance walked into the great chamber of the Galactic Concord and took her seat in the human section, a modest corner with only 2 chairs among the thousands that filled the vast hall. She had done this for 15 years now, and her father had done it before her, and his mother before him, stretching back 300 years to when humanity first joined the Concord as a minor species with 11 star systems and no real power. To speak of the chamber was magnificent in a cold and ancient way. Built by the Velkith Dominion 8,000 years ago, when humans were still learning to farm wheat and tame horses. Massive pillars of black stone rose toward a ceiling so high it vanished into shadow, and holographic displays floated everywhere, showing the faces of delegates from 400 different species. The Therian hegemony controlled the largest section. 80 seats for 80 star systems, their delegates tall and scaled and proud with their crests raised in constant display of dominance. Across from them sat the Velkith Dominion, ancient and religious and certain of their own superiority, their robed priests whispering prayers between every vote. The insectoid Kreth Collective clicked and buzzed in their sealed atmospheric pods, while the silicon-based Monolith Consortium sat perfectly still like the living mountains they resembled. And then there were the humans, 2 seats in a corner, watching and waiting and doing the work that nobody else wanted to do. Alara checked her translation device, a small earpiece that converted 600 alien languages into English in real time. The device was human-made, like most of the translation technology the Concord used, because humans had proven strangely good at understanding how different minds thought and finding ways to bridge the gaps between them. Her aide Thomas Chen sat beside her, young and eager, and still believing that their work here mattered. She remembered feeling that way once, before she understood that the galaxy saw humans as useful tools rather than true partners. The session began with the usual ceremonies, ancient words in the Velkith tongue that praised the wisdom of cooperation and the glory of peace. Alara translated them automatically in her head, noting as always the subtle insults buried in the formal language, the ways the Velkith managed to claim credit for a peace they had nearly shattered a dozen times. High Commander Vrethkal of the Therian hegemony rose to speak, his scales shimmering. Under the chamber lights, he was tall even for his species. Nearly 3 meters of muscle and arrogance wrapped in ceremonial armor that cost more than most humans earned in a lifetime. The Therian hegemony brings grave concerns before this assembly, he announced, his voice booming through the translation. Systems, The Velketh Dominion has violated the territorial agreements of the Kethfor Treaty by establishing unauthorized colonies in the Rimward expansion zone. The Velketh delegate rose immediately, her robes swirling with barely contained fury. The Therian accusations are baseless and insulting, for those colonies existed long before any treaty was signed, and the humans who arbitrated that agreement can confirm our rightful claim. Both delegates turned to look at Alara. This was the moment she had been trained for, the role humanity had played for 3 centuries. She stood, keeping her voice calm and neutral. The human archives confirm that the colonies in question predate the Kethfor Treaty by approximately 200 years, though the treaty language regarding existing settlements contains some ambiguity that could support either interpretation. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Perhaps a joint survey mission could establish the facts more clearly, with human observers to ensure impartiality. Vrethkal's crest flattened with annoyance, but he nodded. The Velketh delegate also nodded, though her eyes remained cold. Crisis averted. At least for today. Thomas leaned close to whisper, "Nice work, Ambassador." Alara did not respond because she knew this was not victory but merely delay, a temporary patch on a wound that had been festering for millennia. The Therians and Velketh hated each other with a passion humans could barely comprehend, and all humanity could do was keep them talking instead of shooting. After the session ended, Alara walked through the corridors of the Concord station toward the human section. She passed medical bays, staffed by human doctors who had learned to treat 17 different biologies, communication centers run by human engineers who kept the translation networks functioning, and arbitration offices where human mediators worked around the clock to resolve disputes that would otherwise end in bloodshed. None of it was glamorous work, and none of it earned humanity any respect. The other species saw humans as convenient helpers, useful because they were weak enough to pose no threat and clever enough to solve problems. They did not see the countless hours of study, the generations of accumulated knowledge, the deep commitment to making the galaxy a better place. A Therian officer passed her in the corridor without acknowledgement, nearly knocking her aside with his bulk. A Kreth delegation buzzed past, speaking rapidly in their own language, making jokes about the tiny pink mammals who thought themselves important. Alara had heard such comments her entire career, and had learned to ignore them back in the human embassy. She found a message waiting from Earth, the medical frigate Meridian. Hope had been dispatched to the Velketh border regions to assist with refugee populations displaced by recent tensions. Dr. Samuel Okonkwo was leading the mission, a brilliant physician who had saved thousands of Therian lives during the Epsilon plague outbreak 5 years ago. Alara smiled at the name because Samuel was one of the good ones, a man who believed in helping others regardless of species or politics. She hoped his mission would go smoothly, though the border regions were dangerous places these days. She turned to the next item on her agenda, a dispute between the Kreth Collective and the Alari Trade Federation over shipping routes. It would take hours of careful negotiation to resolve, and neither side would thank her for the effort. But that was the human way. She reminded herself to do the work that needed doing, whether anyone appreciated it or not. Thomas appeared at her door. "Ambassador, the Kreth delegation is ready for you." She nodded and rose from her desk, straightening her uniform and preparing her translation notes. Another crisis to manage, another fire to put out, another small act of service in a galaxy that barely noticed humans existed.